Hi, friends. It's Taylor from Doomed to Fail. I'm at the airport, so I have a lot of background noise. But today we are re releasing part one of episode two, where Fars tells us about the terrible Turpin family. It's a real sad story. Lots of kids living in a house of horrors. You might have seen them on the news. They went to Disneyland. It's quite weird. Hope you enjoy.
In the
Thanks.
matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to Doomed to Fail, the podcast where we ignore all the red flags. I'm Fars, joined by my co-host, Taylor, and every week we'll be bringing you two tales, one historic and one true crime related, of relationships that were doomed to fail. Taylor, what's our signature drink this week?
You Fars. So this week we'll be going back to ancient Rome. So our cocktail is going to be a glass of red wine, but you have to drink it laying down on a couch covered in pillows, and you don't hold the glass. Someone else holds the glass and pours it into your mouth, and then they back up and they spill the red wine on the carpet. So you sentence them to death by being eaten by a lion. So that's our cocktail. And then our mocktail, because we know not everyone is a drinker. So our mocktail is one of those mustard yellow Tupperware cups from the 80s. It is stained and it is crusty and it's been on the floor for a few years. And it's also just empty. There's no actual like liquid in it. It's just this dirty cup on the floor. And Faris, I think you'll cover why we have that dirty cup on the floor.
I will absolutely be covering why this disgusting cup is on the floor. If you do have a dirty yellow Tupperware cup from the 80s, please wash it before you drink
Yes,
anything out of it.
indeed.
But that's it. Today we're going to be covering Emperor Nero of Rome and the Turpin family and try to find the red flags, which are going to be aplenty. So I'm going to dive right in. We're going to start on the true crime side of the equation. And as usual, I'm going to ask you, Taylor, being the true crime aficionado that you are, are you familiar with the Turpin family case?
I I am, and I kind of feel like I want to gag because it's so gross. I am like I don't know all the details, luckily, but I guess I'll get to know them now. But yeah, I imagine it's real gross and sad.
Very
It's
gross,
sad, isn't
very
it? Yeah.
gross, very sad.
Ugh,
So to kick things off, do you remember Harry, who's Jeff Daniels' character in Dumb and Dumber?
yes.
Okay, picture that guy from now on every time I bring up David Turpin. He looks like he's wearing a mop on his head, and it also looks silky smooth for some reason. So he
Oh my
apparently
God.
cares. He cares enough about his hair to condition and moisturize it, but not enough to actually cut it and modernize it and make it look normal, which is very, very interesting. Um,
Okay, great. That got it. Got it.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So with that preamble, let's start in on David and Louise Turpin. Right at the top, I'm going to blame religion and power dynamics for
Hmm.
this story. Religion
Hmm.
tends to play in quite a bit, as we've seen in the last episode as well, into my true crime cases. David and Louise met when he was 23 and she was 16.
Yeah.
Obvious power dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Um, I get that a 7 year age gap doesn't mean much when you're 40 and she's 33. But by this time, David was a computer engineer. He had the
Wow.
air of a man who had his shit together to a 16-year-old, right?
Yeah. Totally. It's a huge difference. Yeah.
Huge difference. From what I
Yeah.
could gather, they only were together for about a year before getting married in 1985. And the circumstances under which they got married were also really interesting. They kind of absconded with each other without the parents, with her parents completely disapproving of this, trying to get married to each other. And then somehow they came back home and they squared things away with her parents and were able to get married. But it was kind of like he basically was trying to take advantage of a 16-year-old is how I interpreted this.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
there's no way to not. Like, there's a thing like if you're underage, then like it's against your will. There's no such thing. You can't
ex-
consent if you're a child. So,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So going into a bit of their individual histories, Louise seems to have had a really rough childhood. According to her sister Teresa, their mother would sell the girls to local pedophiles.
Ew, oh God.
Yeah, Teresa is quoted as saying, this is all a quote, he would slip money into my hands as he molested me. I
Oh,
can still feel his breath on my neck as he whispered, be quiet. We begged her not to take us to him, but she would simply say, I have to clothe and feed you. Louise was abused the worst. He destroyed my self-worth as a child, and I know he destroyed hers too. This is Teresa, the sister, talking,
Oh
which
God.
is crazy. I didn't have an exact age range here where this was going on, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's
No.
awful no matter what.
So, I mean,
And
it sounds like she never had a chance. Like,
yeah,
ugh, 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 ugh,
yeah, she kind of
terrible.
started off with a bad hand.
Mm-hmm.
Using
Yeah.
poker terms, which I'm terrible at. And the story was actually corroborated. So they have another sister who's named Elizabeth. She corroborated the sexual abuse story too, but then she also leveled some pretty stupid accusations against Louise to kind of impute her character and justify what she did. She
Huh.
wrote a book. The book is called Sisters of Secrets. And so, for context, Teresa was of the opinion, I can't believe that my sister would do this. This is insane. Whereas Elizabeth was of the opinion of course she could do this. Look at her past, look at her history, look at what she was involved in. But they're
Hmm.
so stupid. She accused her of drinking, smoking, going to bars, practicing witchcraft,
I love that. I
gambling,
love that for her. Yeah.
eating steaks, and then she made some like vague sexual promiscuity claims against her. Don't know exactly what those were related to, but all this sounds like. I mean, eating snakes is a little bit unusual unless you're in Louisiana, but the
Oh,
rest
I
of
thought you
this,
said steak. I was like, that seems fine, but snakes. I see. I get it.
that's
I get
the
it.
slithering kind, not the delicious cow kind. Um, but all this kind of sounds like just edgy emo shit that anybody would do when
Doesn't
they're.
even sound edgy.
It
Like,
is, yeah, exactly right. It's fairly standard operating procedure for most kids.
yeah.
Um, So Elizabeth sounds like, going back to our theme from last week, a bit of a wet noodle. So we're
Yeah.
not a huge fan of Elizabeth because she basically tried to find any reason to justify what ended up happening, which we're about to dive straight into.
Totally.
But before we dive into it, building back on the characters at hand here, David was kind of the flip side of that equation. He was a bit of a baby straight edge. He was part of the Bible, chess, and science clubs. He made really good grades, and actually, I ended up going back and finding his high school yearbook picture.
Oh
He
my God,
had the
amazing.
hair. He had the mop hair in high school. It was absolutely incredible. He looked exactly the same.
Oh my gosh, that kind of thing feels like permanent. Maybe it was just permanent. Like you just can't do anything about it. That's so
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. Um, I didn't put this in the outline, but I wanted to call this out because if any of you have look up a picture of these two, the one thing that I found really interesting about this, despite kind of like how they ended up, they were part of a swingers community. So they had swinger parties too, which again, nothing wrong with being a swinger,
Yeah, good for them.
but
That's fine.
they are. Imagine walking into that house that I'm about to describe and preparing yourself to have a sex party with these people.
I think
Um,
the problem with being a swinger is like not everyone is attractive.
some of
You have to
them
be,
look like Harry from Dumb and Dumber. Yes,
but also maybe you like that. So you just have to kind of know what you're getting into. Like, don't be
yes.
surprised. If you're like, I like that, then like, great. But if you're like, I expect it to be something like really beautiful and like sexy, and you get there and it's like, no. But remember on Always Sunny when they go to the sex party, Danny DeVito's eating from the buffet.
Oh
Anyway, it's
yes.
gross. It's gross. That's what I'm imagining. Like there's also a buffet.
Well, it's not even their appearance I'm addressing here. I'm addressing the fact that you walk into what I'm about to describe as the house
Oh
to have
yeah.
sex with these people, and it's like, what could be going through your mind? But I'll get to the house, and then we'll back our way into like now. Imagine walking into this to have sex with these people. Um, so going back to this story, in 2011, David files for bankruptcy, claiming $240,000 in credit card debt. That's an insane amount of credit card debt.
What are you buying with that? Like a car?
I don't.
You know?
I don't even think you can buy a car on a credit card. I think you have to actually take out an auto loan or something. Like it's.
Yeah.
I mean, this number really blew me away. I mean, sure, everybody has credit card debt. It's a thing. It is what it is. But this amount of it is
Hmm.
pretty remarkable to me, especially because
Totally.
when you factor in that he had a really good salary. He made about $140,000 a
Yeah,
year
totally.
as an engineer.
Awesome. Hmm.
Um, you know, I don't know if this detail is particularly significant, the debt that they were in, but I can
Hmm.
see why that level of debt could increase stress levels and kind of
Of
inhibit some
course.
rational thinking.
Yeah.
But I mean, what ended up happening kind of goes a little bit, not a little bit, it goes a lot beyond just stress related to some debt. But I don't know. What do you think about
Yeah.
that, Taylor?
Well, I also think like I know you're going to talk about it, but part of it is like they have a shit ton of children. So like I don't know, maybe think about your financial situation before you have 47 kids. Like stuff like that that I think maybe also ties to the religion factor as well. Maybe they like didn't take precautions to not have kids, but like at some point you have to be like I'm way over my head with this debt. I should stop incurring more expenses,
Yeah.
aka having like 7,000 kids.
Yeah, whenever I consider the debt piece of it and then looked at
Hmm.
what ended up happening, I was like, well, could this have been a response to like we just don't have the money for these children and this is
Right.
the only option we have? I mean, obviously that's not an excuse, but I'm trying to create logic in an
Yeah.
incredibly illogical situation.
Totally, but if you like you have a dog, if you like are like, I can't afford to take care of my dog, you wouldn't stop feeding your dog, you would give it to someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You'd
Yeah.
rehome it.
Yeah.
So going back to the story, they lived in Fort Worth, which is just outside of Dallas, Texas, until 1999, and then they moved to another town in Texas called Rio Vista. In 2007, they moved 10 of their children into a trailer on that property in Rio Vista.
Oh my God.
There was two other kids, so there was 12 in total, and the two youngest stayed in the house with their parents. The other 10 were brought groceries on a weekly basis, but apparently it wasn't enough food for all of them. This trailer eventually looked exactly like what you would expect when the family left it.
Oh my
From the way
God.
it was described by neighbors, it was basically like an episode of Hoarders. It was just feces everywhere, dead animals everywhere, food. It was filthy,
Those
absolutely,
poor
absolutely filthy.
babies. Oh my
Yeah,
God. I
and
can't
I
even imagine.
can't. And the thing is, I mean, how big of a trailer could it have possibly been? I didn't see it. I didn't get dimensions on it, but 10 people is
And
just
ugh, yeah.
you'd have to be sleeping on the floor, I would assume, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God.
So,
Poor
yeah.
babies.
Well, the family relocated to Paris, California in 2014. People thought they were odd, but nothing super out of the ordinary. They would occasionally do nice family things. If you Google the Turpins, one of the first pictures you'll pull up is of them at Disneyland, and they're all wearing, Thing T-shirts, Thing one, two, three, four. They're wearing all of those, and they look normal, minus, David's haircut. Like they actually did some stuff occasionally together.
It's also so funny because that's so expensive. Like, I don't want to go to Disneyland with my four-person family because I don't feel like spending $4,000. Like
Yeah,
I
so I don't have kids, so I don't know what this would equate to, but could you rack up $240,000 in credit card debt by taking your kids to Disneyland?
no, but you could rack up like 15
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
if you went there for like a week and like stayed in a hotel and had tickets and bought food and like whatever and made those thing t-shirts.
Yeah.
It could be a lot. Yeah.
Going back to like the pictures these folks say, there was another picture that came up, which is of them getting renewing their vows with all their children
Yes.
in tow. You've
Hmm.
seen that, right? It's so eerie. It's like they're so pleased with one another. There's something about it that just like shook me.
They definitely look like, oh, we're so happy and we're so in love. And like we're renewing our vows and there's like an Elvis and they just look so super happy and you're like, what? I don't be pleased with yourself. You're doing a terrible job.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
So look up these people and see these pictures because it's a little haunting after you realize what those kids were going through while all this was happening.
Hmm.
Um, so they were both Pentecostal. They believed that they were called to have this many children by God. So kudos to you, Taylor. You kind of guessed why this ended up happening the way that it ended up happening. Um, I researched Pentecostalism and realized that these
Yeah.
are the people that speak in tongues. Are you
Got
familiar with
it.
this?
I think so. Like I was going to ask you, like, tell me a little bit more about being Pentecostal. So, um, tell
Yeah.
me about speaking in tongues. It sounds hilarious. Just tell me
I I went down a rabbit hole with this because I was just blown away at like the belief
about it.
system here.
Oh
So
my God.
these are the folks that think that the Holy Spirit inhibits their body, and they'll start just speaking in gibberish under the auspices that that is the Holy Spirit in their body trying to express itself. There was I can't remember his name now. There was a huge mega church guy in Dallas who would do this all the time. He would get on TV. I remember I used to watch this. I grew up in Dallas. and I would
Hmm.
watch this guy on late night TV just like doing gibberish talking to the camera, trying to get people to send him money, and then he ended up being found as a total scam artist and got sued by the government and everything else. But it's crazy. Like they fall on the ground, they roll around. It's like basically the shittiest improv skit of all time, and then people just buy into it for some reason.
But they don't know, like, do they try to like translate what they're saying?
No,
And I don't,
it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
but they don't try to be like, this nonsense means give me money and or they're just like, it's just nonsense. Watch me do it.
So you're kind of onto something on that last point. So the theology is also tied to the prosperity theology, which are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, so this means that having material and financial wealth is a sign that God thinks you're great, basically.
Ah.
So, yeah, so if you're poor because God hates you. If you're
Mm.
rich because God loves you. Um, yeah, so it basically means that your faith in God is what brings you these things. And I find
Uh-huh.
it interesting when factored in with the bankruptcy because you kind of have to think to yourself, you know, were they thinking to themselves like I guess I was wondering how psychologically with if you believe this stuff how would you
Hmm.
feel if you were also this destitute as they ended up being.
Maybe you
um
ignore the debt and you like think, well, I'm rich because I can buy all these things, even though you're not, and you're like not thinking about like, oh, but I don't have that money, I have to pay it back.
I was actually thinking in terms of did they think that if they neglected their kids and spent as little as possible to keep them alive it would help them with God because they'd had money left over,
Right.
you know,
Hmm.
like it's not good, it's not good.
Yeah, no.
So the kids. So there are 10 daughters, 3 sons, all born between 1988 and 2015.
Oh my God.
Um, so towards the end of this saga, which we haven't even got to the house yet, but I'm gonna skip forward to that, how this ended up happening because what ended up happening, they discovered the house is critical here. So
Hmm.
as this saga is coming to an end and they're about to be discovered, apparently there was a bunch of talks of the family all moving to Oklahoma. I don't know exactly the details of what happened here, but in 2018, one of the kids, her name's Jordan, she was 17 at the time, fled through the window and ran a distance from the house before calling 911 on a cell phone she had on her. Apparently, there was some internal discussions amongst the kids who were all destitute together that
Hmm.
moving to Oklahoma for whatever reason would be basically the end of them. That would be their death. I don't know exactly what happened because it was already awful. It was already awful for this many
Right.
years, and what was the reason for this? The other thing I don't understand is why these how these kids had cell phones. There's actually multiple examples of this. I'm going to go into a little bit later, but the kids apparently had cell phones on them, and for some reason they were still running out of the house to
Did they go
make
to
the phone
school?
call.
Did they go to
No,
school?
no. What's actually amazing and really funny is David listed himself on some tax filing or something as a principal of Sandcastle Day School
That is
that
like
he
how it's,
operated from his house. Yeah,
oh,
exactly. It was his
gross.
house. And
Um,
he actually got a another conviction for falsifying records for to on a official form because of
oh,
this
good.
principal thing. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I know you can get a cell phone, if you are financially in need of a cell phone, because you do need one to like get a job and like things like that, so you can get one via assistance, but I don't know how they would have like applied for that assistance. I also know that you can dial 911 on phones that don't work. So if you have a phone that isn't connected to like a plan, you can still dial 911 on it.
So
So
that's actually really good advice for anybody, like if you actually need to
yeah.
do it. But I will say, and you'll see later on, that these phones had service. I'll explain that bit in a moment. Which
I have
again,
no
I
idea.
don't. Yeah. I don't know how they got cell phones. I don't know why they didn't use them earlier. I don't know why they had to leave the house to use them, so on and so forth. It's all a little bit of a mystery. But Jordan ended up doing this, and the police showed up, and Jordan showed them pictures that she'd taken on that cell phone of the house. And Jordan told the police, quote, "My two little sisters right now are chained up. They're chained up because they stole mother's food."
Ew.
Imagine being a cop who heard that. I feel like I would just, I feel like, what? They stole mom's food? Crazy.
Well, I don't say mom, say mother. They called her mother like Mike Pence calls his wife mother. Like that's not great. Just like
Ugh.
when you hear that, you're like, that's bad. Um, I also feel like there's I mean, There's so many people who dedicate their lives to helping children who are in these terrible situations, but there's also a place where they like don't know what is normal, you know?
Yeah.
So like maybe a lot of it, they're like, yeah, this is just our life. Like I've never seen a life that isn't like this, but also like it must feel terrible. It's just
So
terrible.
so I'm gonna go into that too because I thought a lot about that as well, and it ties into the cell phones and everything else here in a moment.
Mhm.
Um, so the police responded for a welfare check to the house and just found it incomplete as right. Obviously, it was also
Mhm.
what you would picture of a hoarder's house. Except the detail that gets me is that they keep finding dead pets in the house.
Ew.
Like they don't bury or cremate them. They just like live with them decomposing
Oh
on
my
their living
God.
room floor. I don't know what pets it was. It just said pets.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, no, that's so gross. Whenever I see that in hoarders, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, there's a cat skeleton in the corner." You're like, "How did we get here?" Like
Yes,
that's
seriously.
so much farther than like not taking out your trash. That's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. That detail. You're right. When I watch Hoarders, I also have that reaction. Is that's the
Mm.
one detail? It's like of everything else, that's the one I least understand.
I also just
Um,
love watching hoarders. I keep waiting for them a new season. I've watched all of it. I want more. But continue.
yes,
I think
same page. We have the exact same TV addiction. Um, police witnessed one of the kids was shackled to a bed.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and apparently, I don't know how they know this, but apparently he'd been shackled there for weeks. I can only presume it was based on the reaction to the shackles on his skin that they would be able to deduce how long he'd been up there.
Hmm.
The details of what these kids endured is kind of beyond comprehension. They were obviously incredibly malnourished and extremely dirty. They were regularly
Hmm.
beaten. They were only allowed to bathe once per year.
Oh my God.
Go back to the 10 kids in the RV or the trailer, right? Once a
Mm-hmm.
year living in those conditions. They were also regularly shackled, as police had already observed, and they had very little understanding of the outside world. Apparently, they were fed only once a day, and they also weren't allowed to use the indoor bathroom. So I can only imagine there was like a shit bucket sitting somewhere inside the room that
Right.
these kids were in. It was,
Oh my God.
yeah, unbelievable. So I'm gonna go back to what you'd mentioned, which is their understanding of the outside world, and
Yeah.
also tie that into the cell phones. One detail as I was reading about this story and researching it was in 2014, Jordan, the daughter who ran out to call the police,
Yeah.
she saw a Justin Bieber video on her brother's cell phone.
Huh.
Yeah, and she'd also been watching Hannah Montana and High School Musical on this cell phone. So that point's like, hey, the cell phones worked. The cell phones had
Right.
service. So like,
Right.
totally don't understand how that wasn't being used. But can you imagine that? Can you imagine being that isolated and then seeing stuff like that? Like I get FOMO if I just stay on a rainy Saturday. I
No,
can't
totally.
imagine what it must feel like. You're covered in dirt, wearing tattered clothes, starving, walking around in shit, and you see essentially the polar opposite. Like, I mean, I've never watched Hannah Montana, but I would assume that it is the polar opposite, right?
It is. Yes. I don't think
Okay.
I've watched it, but it is. You remember how our friend Jeff was in Hannah Montana?
Was he really?
Yeah, he was in like an episode where they were like playing volleyball for some reason, and he like played he like won against her or something. Anyway,
I need, oh, you know what? That does ring a bell. That actually does ring a bell. I need to go find that. Um,
um,
yeah,
like what would you think it was? Yeah.
this part of it just blows me away of like you watch this stuff, you know that there's a world like that out there, and you live in this situation. It's incredible.
Hmm. Yeah, but just like how much have you been brainwashed to think that that is the life that you should live, right?
Yeah.
But also, doesn't living like that mean God hates you? I'm not expecting any rational answers from this, but I'm just saying that like if you're living like in poverty, God hates you, right?
But here's the thing. I mean, given how they treated these kids, I don't think that, religious teachings were being imposed on them. It doesn't
Yeah,
seem
that's
like
true.
it seems like the Louise and David were having their own lives being run in parallel to like these separate lives these kids were living.
Right,
So I
because
don't
he
even
like
know
went
if
to
they would
work.
interpret that. Yeah, he went to work. He had a great job. Like
That's
he
crazy.
was doing his
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, So the parents were obviously arrested and they were charged with torture, false imprisonment, abuse of a dependent adult, since several of the children were 18 or older, and child
Oh my
abuse.
God.
The dad was additionally charged with lewd acts on a child.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Not that that's surprising, but oh no.
I
Yeah.
know, I know. They ultimately pled guilty. So originally they pled not guilty, and then they changed their plea to guilty. And they were thankfully sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. I think after 22 years, but apparently the general prevailing theory is that given the nature of the crimes, that there's no chance it would ever be released into the public.
Good.
Um,
And they're separated, right? Obviously, because she's in a women's prison, he's in a men's prison.
totally,
That's
totally.
awesome. That's great. I'm
Um,
happy they're not together.
yeah, they don't do much good together.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of an aftermath. So a bit of an aftermath as far as these kids are concerned. That's really depressing. So we're going to continue on that theme. Um, it's kind of hard to imagine, but some of these kids suffered even more after this event.
What?
Obviously, the kids were taken away, right? Like they
Yes.
were taken away, and the state had to, well, the county had to figure out what resources to kind of apply to bring these kids back up
Hmm.
to be able to live reasonable lives. The kids were obviously super fucked up psychologically and also had health ailments because of the lack of nutrition. They
Oh.
ultimately spent 2 months in the hospital. It's crazy.
Hmm.
It's a long time.
Hmm.
Um, this is where it gets bad, Taylor. So, five of the kids were adopted by a family, and these people were utter pieces of shit.
Oh
I
my
don't
God.
know
I'm
how.
hiding out of the screen because I'm so upset.
Yeah, I don't know how you find people like this and not appropriately vet them, but apparently Riverside County didn't. The kind of abuse they suffered, I'm going to read the laundry list of it here. They were hit in the face, they had their hair pulled, they were hit with belts, they were forced to eat excessive amounts of food, and then when they vomited, they were forced to eat their vomit.
Oh.
And, it's a given, but we'll just tack it on anyways. The foster father was also accused of fondling and kissing them on the mouth.
Ew, oh, those poor
Yeah,
kids. Jesus
yeah.
Christ. I don't. Oh my God.
It's like how much can someone take, right? I mean,
And I can't believe there's people out there who are like, I'd love 5 kids to abuse, please. Like
yeah,
they've just been like waiting for that. And like, what have they done in the past? And like, oh God. Ugh.
yeah. It's really really bad. So the foster parents were obviously arrested as well in the mix
Oh
in the
my
middle of
God.
all this. But yeah, so this story has some parallels with cults. So I'm gonna
Hmm.
do a little bit of a sidebar here. I'm mostly thinking about hardcore insular poly marriage, whatever it's called,
Hmm.
of
Yeah, yeah,
Mormonism.
yeah.
And I'm also thinking of the Children of God, who are now known as the Family International.
Hmm.
So when I read stories about people who have left these groups, you're struck by
Hmm.
the fact that they can't take care of themselves. Everything's done for you. You're part of a community, a bad one, but
Hmm.
you're part of a
Hmm.
community that everything's done for you. They don't know how to do the basic adult stuff, how to open a bank account, rent an
Right.
apartment, buy furniture, work a normal job, so on and so forth. That was all going on here as well.
Hmm.
Because usually it's because everything was done for you, and then teaching basic life skills wasn't really good for whoever the leader was, whether it's
Right.
Children of
They
God,
want to keep you
Mormonism, or these
there.
people. Yeah.
Yeah,
The harder you make it to leave, the less likely someone is to do so.
totally.
And that's the impression I get of what's going on here. These kids, as they age out of the foster program, are kind of just dropped into the real world with no understanding of how to do normal things.
Hmm.
And like, I don't blame them. I don't know if you remember what you were like when you were 18, but when I was 18, I mean, I didn't have my shit together until I was probably like 32. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. And you knew about the world also, you know. How old are you now? You're like 33?
What, in terms of maturity? Probably
No,
33,
in
yes.
terms of you saying that you guys should do it when you were 32. I'm just asking how long
Oh,
ago
yeah,
you think
yeah.
that was.
It's been 6 years. It's been a solid 6 years since I've had my
Not
shit
bad.
together.
Okay, cool.
Um, but no, I mean, look, if you drop me into the real world, even without the exposure of abuse that these kids suffered at 18, I probably would have just died in the gutter. Like, there's no way I would have figured
Yeah,
my shit out, right? Like, nobody
absolutely.
would, I don't think.
I don't think so. I mean, what are you gonna, how are you even gonna know how to get a job? Or like and then if you don't have anything, how do you get anything? Like getting an apartment, you have to have money to even start, like there's not like
So
it's so hard.
this story gets worse now that you mentioned money. So some of these kids ended up being homeless. Obviously,
Yeah,
Riverside County was the county that had jurisdiction over the kids, the child services, and were responsible basically their well-being. They were sued by some of the kids for placing them in that shithead foster family's house, and
100%.
also because this part I don't recall from when the news broke on this case, but apparently the public donated around $2 million for the
I'm
care and
sure.
well-being of these kids.
Yeah.
And
Where'd
what's
that
nuts?
go?
So it never was distributed. There was a
Mhm.
guardian ad litem who never distributed the funds. The kids would ask for it. It would they would never get it. And yeah, that's why the kids end up homeless in a lot of cases, is because they age out of the foster program and they
Yeah.
had no resources to fall back on and no life skills. And this guardian ad litem, for whatever reason, abdicated her responsibilities and just did not distribute the resources to these kids they needed to survive. So
Oh
basically,
my God.
everybody failed these kids,
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
and
like I
through.
wouldn't I wouldn't say you should give them $2 million because they don't know what to do with it and they might just buy a house and like don't not take care of it because they don't know how, but you could like give them money for an apartment, and like, right? Wouldn't that be that guardian's job to like
So
help
that's the
them?
responsibility of the guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem is that their guardian.
Yeah.
It's in lieu of parents. This is the person who is supposed to tell you, here's how you go get health care. Here's how you go shopping for food. Here's how you create a bank account. Here's
I
how
feel like I could
you
do that for them. I could do
we
that.
side hustle
Yeah.
is become a guardian ad litem, but and then also as part of all of that is distribute resources as needed. Like you have to make a case for it, right? You're not
Yeah.
the guardian ad litem isn't just going to say, "Here's $2 million, good luck, go
Exactly.
at it."
Yeah. Which I think
But
is
she
the right
didn't.
decision. Yeah. But
Yeah,
she
but
should do something.
she didn't do anything
Yeah.
exactly. So that's where we are right now. The parents are in jail, presumably for the rest of their lives. Thankfully, the kids are unfortunately like not
Not
doing
doing
that
great.
great, it sounds like.
Yeah.
All this is fairly recent, so every now and then there's news stories that come up. I think the most recent one was December of 2021 about what the update is on the kids. So there's going to be more and more updates on this. We'll update this podcast as we hear more about what's going on with the kids. Apparently, one of
Hmm.
them did graduate from high school, so that's good. But like when you're dealt a hand this bad, it's kind of tough to recover.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
so that's my story about the Turpins. And when I think
Oh, that's
about
horrible.
when I think about the concept of this being doomed to fail, I really fall back on the conclusion of the control dynamic between David and Louise.
Hmm.
I don't think Louise is a good person, but I also think that she was horribly emotionally and
Physically.
psychologically
Yeah.
and physically damaged in her
Yeah.
childhood. And so she hooks up with a guy when she's still a child who's 7 years her
Hmm.
elder and David. And I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that David kind of ruled their decision making. Whatever David did and said would probably work. And she doesn't have
Yeah.
any understanding of what a normal childhood should look like. Like you learn from
Totally.
what your parents teach you, and she never learned the right way to do that. And so,
Yeah. I think the cycle of abuse is what, dooms this couple and this family to fail because there's no, like you said, there's nothing like good to look back on and know like what it felt like to be like loved and taken care of and all those things. I think it's just like, and who knows if he abused her or
yeah,
she, like what that might have been like, because she seems super happy, but like she also is definitely in a weird situation, like the power dynamic of the 16-year-old marrying a 20 whatever year old. Like, I hate that.
yeah, yeah, not good. None of it's good. Hopefully, the kids recover. And that is our true crime story of the week. So,
I think a good takeaway is to look into your neighbor's windows and make sure they're not doing anything weird.
if you go to a swinger's house and there's dead cats and dogs in the living room, tell somebody.
Yes, tell someone. Like I think that's, if you think someone's in trouble, please tell someone. I
Yeah,
know that like we're not like the cops are the best. The foster system obviously is not the best, but you should definitely tell someone and try to do something. See
absolutely,
something, say
absolutely.
something. Yeah.
See something, say
Right. That was part one of episode two on the Turpin family. Hope you're all okay. Next week, we will be re releasing part two, where I go into the story of Emperor Nero and his wife Pompeia and all of the absolute chaos that Nero caused in Rome. Later in our podcast episodes, I also talk about how the city of Pompeii was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius, and that's kind of a similar time period. Nero did travel to Pompeii to sing, obviously, and then also to do a little bit of governing, see some races. He stopped a riot, kind of. So all sorts of stuff. It all connects. You can check out my history timeline if you look at our linked traits in on our Instagram, and you can kind of see where it all fits together. So yeah. Join us for next week for that. And then also follow us everywhere that you listen to podcasts. Please tell your friends. And we're at Doomed to Fail Pod. Thank you.